Okay, welcome everyone to our MicroConference, community conversations on open discussions on openness. I'm going to be moderating today's session. My name is Dr. Wilma Hodges. I'm an Apereo board member. I'm also the vice chair this year. And I have a few other hats that I wear. I'm the Sakai community manager, so I do community management, events, coordination, strategic direction for the Sakai LMS open source project under Apereo. I'm also the director of training and e-learning at Longsight, one of the longest running supporters of open source and Sakai specifically. We provide hosting and services around that. I'm also the founder of Red Willow Solutions LLC, which is my freelance business for consulting on things like instructional design, training, project management, UI, UX, technical documentation. So those are sort of the different realms in which I operate. I've been working in higher ed and learning technologies for more than 25 years. So this is kind of familiar ground for me. So I'll be happy to connect you with our speaker if you have additional questions after today's session. So first, let me just remind folks that if you have not already signed up, you may want to go ahead and join Apereo Communications. You'll find the link to do that in the footer of the apereo.org website, and that will help you stay informed with all of our events, things like these micro conferences, but other news and events across all of our different project communities. So I do encourage you to sign up for that newsletter. And we'd also like to thank our MicroConference sponsors. We have JMA Consulting, which is a Civi CRM specialist organization, and they advocate open source tools, e-consultation, citizen engagement. So they help us with registrations and sort of the logistics of getting folks signed up for the event. And we'd also like to thank our platform sponsor, Big Blue Button. That's the meeting tool that we're using today and for all of our other micro conferences. And we'd also like to thank the Apereo community, which is a diverse group of open source advocates and projects that are all very committed and active around open source. So today's session is Start Where You Are, Building Stronger Collaborations with or Without an OSPO with Duane O'Brien from Capital One. Today's session is going to focus on practical ways to spark stronger collaborations at your university or organization. And whether you're just starting out or you're pretty far down the road with funding and support, he's going to be able to guide you and have recommendations for next steps. And so we can expect a mix of strategy, inspiration, and his trademark humor. So let me just give you a brief bio of our speaker. Duane O'Brien is a director of engineering at Capital One, where he focuses on building collaborative engineering practices. He has been building, leading, and advising open source program offices for more than a decade. Duane is a force of chaotic good, using his high stats and intelligence and charisma to advocate for the open source community. If you encounter him in forested areas, he will share his fire, drink, and philosophy. So with that D&D inspired bio, I will go ahead and hand it off to Duane. And let me just give you presenter back.
No problem. And I clearly need to update my headshot picture. There's a lot more gray in my beard now than there was in that pre-pandemic headshot. I also strongly advise if you struggle to write a bio, have one of your friends write a bio for you, which is how I wound up with that one. Great to see some names I recognize and a lot of names I don't recognize joining in the chat today. So thank you for joining. Before we jump off, I want to just sort of qualify that while my day job, I do work at Capital One, I do lead a collaborative engineering organization. I'm appearing today just as myself on my own time and under my own auspices. So want to make sure that we're clear with that coming from the outset. So I think we covered it mostly in the introduction, but a couple of things to add. I think a lot about open source sustainability in particular, and throughout the years that has been focused primarily in the commercial open source program office space, and thinking a lot about how to help companies get more involved in the projects that they use, and more involved in funding some of those projects as well. It's a very different kind of space in the academic world than it is in the commercial world. And most of my experience, my lived experience in open source program offices has been in the commercial space. So I have some perspective to bring to bear from that world. And there's a lot of perspective from the academic space that I don't share. And I think you'll see a blend of that throughout the rest of the rest of the presentation. I also serve as a board member on the Open Source Collective, which is the nonprofit that serves as the fiscal host for many of the open source projects hosted by the Open Collective Network. As I look at the list of folks down the people who've joined chat, I would love it if folks would drop in just a sentence about them and sort of where themselves and where you fit in sort of the open source world and the open source academic space, and where you are in your journey. It'll help me to calibrate sort of my messaging and how I'm talking to folks as we go. I will switch back and forth between saying Open Source Programs Office or Open Source Program Office or OSPO. If you're coming in and are not familiar with OSPO, that's what the acronym means. I'll try to unpack it as we go along. But this might be your first time joining a webinar where we're talking about open source programs offices. The program office in general, you can read a lot of different definitions about what they are and what they're supposed to be. You hear people describe them as centers of competency or organizational constructs. Some people use them as a centralized authority for decision making. I don't think we have to complicate it with big, long definitions. Just think of your OSPO as a place that you send people when they need open source help. And in my first experience running operations for an open source program office, we really thought of ourselves as the concierge desk for our company. Anybody who had any kind of open source question, no matter what it was, they came to us. We looked for a way to try and help them. OSPOs, as a sort of named term, really blossomed in the last 10 or 12 years or so, primarily out of the commercial space. We see a lot of organizations that have adopted them. There's been a lot of talks, there's conferences about it. I believe the To-Do group, which is a big working group for people who lead open source programs offices, just released a book at a conference recently that is sort of collective wisdom from people who run open source program offices. And we've seen over the last several years that process, open source program offices being adopted within academia. The Curious Network is one network of these open source program offices. When I looked last night, I believe there were 25 members in that network right now. And I'm sure there are other universities and colleges that have adopted something like an open source program office that just aren't reflected here. I'll also caveat, I'm going to baseline to saying university a lot, if just to kind of make it easier to talk about all academic institutions. So if you see university and you don't work in a university, you work in something that a college or something that goes by a different name. I'm talking about all of us. When it comes to what an open source program office does or could do, this is sort of the beginning of a problem that I want to spread out through the rest of the talk. There are a lot of different things that OSPOs do or could do. There's different roles depending on their sizes and all kinds of different responsibilities that they could take on. This is a screenshot from a mind map of what some of these things are that is led by the To-Do group. And this is a collapsed mind map. If we expand it, it becomes entirely unreadable. And there are so many different things that you could do or that an OSPO might be responsible for that it can quickly become overwhelming. And I set up this talk saying that I wanted to try to help people find like the next step in helping them build collaborations, no matter where they are or where they were in their OSPO journey. And that idea of taking a next step, came down to the idea of using a campus map for this metaphor. If you're standing on the X in this wide range of choices. And if I was standing next to you in the parking lot and you said, what should my next step be? We immediately understand that really depends entirely on where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. And that same process is what applies to you in your open source context, whether you're just getting started out and you don't have a sponsor or you already have a team. Your next step is defined entirely by where you're trying to go. And sometimes it can be difficult to understand and filter out what those things are because there are so many different opportunities in front of you at your university and so many different challenges that you could take on. I know that when I first got started in this space, there were a lot of things that my employer could do. And I made a sort of very early career mistake of trying to do all of them. And as a result, we made a little bit of progress on some things here and a little bit of progress on some things there, but I learned a lot from that process and have moved sort of into a different footing. Nowadays, I take this idea of a capability maturity model, and there's a URL for it across the bottom, and apply it to the decision-making process that I do and the decision-making process I advise other people to do when they're building out and leading their open source programs offices. Now, toward the end of the talk, I'll pull up 3 specific examples and look at how we can apply sort of this maturity model way of thinking on those examples. But I want to start by just sort of taking 3 different shaped program offices. The person who just has some ideas but doesn't have any sponsorship. A person who has some ideas and a sponsor, so they have a little bit of backing. And then a person and a sponsor with a little bit of a team who are working to drive changes and open source changes across your university. So let's talk about if it's just you. You might be the only one in the organization who's sort of championing this cause. And if that's true, it's probably not your full-time job. It's a passion area. A good analog here, a good parallel here to think about is the way most startups begin, right? There's someone's passion idea that they're working on in their free time or their personal time in evenings and weekends and so on and so forth. And this might feel similar to what you're experiencing. You don't have any sponsorship, you don't have any dollars, and a world of opportunities that you can go after. So if it's just you, my recommendation is that you prioritize building your coalition. And by that I mean that both the allies on the ground who are going to be served by open source improvements that you drive in your university, but also advocate for you within their own parts of the organization. And that starts with knowing who your target sponsor is. There's somebody at your university who is going to be the ideal sponsor for the open source work that you want to take on. And it might not be the first or second obvious choice, right? So as you go through to identify who you think your target sponsor could be, you want to make sure that you understand what their goals are and that they have a problem that you can try to help them solve with open source. So as you're thinking about knowing your target sponsor, you also need to map out what the opportunities are across the university. And again, if we look at that big sort of university map I showed earlier, when we think about the OSPO mind map and all of the different things that you could do, not all of them are going to exist in your context. By way of example, if I step sort of out of the university context, there are some companies and some organizations that have to pay much closer attention to license compliance tooling than other organizations, right? Your university might care about that a lot, and it might not care about it at all. Some universities are going to be very, very motivated by the idea of tech transfer, and for some, that's just not one of their core values, right? So understanding all of the different places that you think open source could make a difference within your university will help you identify your target sponsor and help you get to understand who's going to be the right advocate for you in this case. When you've mapped out your opportunities, you need to pick one problem to solve. Again, this is if your passion time, if it's your personal time, you can't there is a risk at seeing all of the opportunities and trying to do everything and not making meaningful progress on any one of them. So picking a single problem to solve that you know is a problem for your target sponsor that aligns to one of the bigger opportunities, and working that problem specifically, because you're on the road here to collecting stories and collecting allies, right? You want to demonstrate that you can solve this problem for your sponsor. You want to collect anecdotes about how you have solved this problem, and sort of a body of stories that you and your sponsor can carry to the university to support the work. And those sort of friends and expanded network across the university, they're going to serve not just as your advocates, but as sort of your ground team, your street team for when you're trying to drive open source changes in your university. Now, if you've got a sponsor, you're sort of dynamic duo, my recommendation is to focus on prioritizing your strategy. And this means understanding on that map which of the few things that you're going to do and the tactics that you're going to use to get there, and the tactics you're going to use to build maturity in that direction. One of the most useful tools, and one of the things I think we do less in the academic context than we do in the commercial context, is invest in knowing your customers and thinking about the people that we serve in universities as customers. In the commercial world, if I'm building a product or if I'm building a service, it's not uncommon for a product manager to sit down and create user personas, and they have names. Phil is a software engineer who loves his 9-to-5 job. He's got 2 kids. He doesn't like working late hours, and he needs to focus on being able to have flexible work arrangements, and so he needs a strong video conferencing software, right? So, something along those lines, where they'll have a name and they have a problem they're trying to solve, and so on. Investing in really getting out and creating some personas for your customers, thinking about them as customers, talking to them, interviewing them, understanding their needs. That is one of the most useful things that you can do in helping to understand if your strategy is going to meet their needs, or if you have a passion for working in a particular area, but you don't have any customers and you can't find them. So invest in, as you're working to prioritize your strategy, invest in knowing your customers. I already said invest in your strategy. That means sitting down together with you and your sponsor, having done your customer research, and not just picking a direction that you want to go, but identifying the incremental steps that you're going to take to build maturity in that direction. And we'll talk about that a little more practically at the end when we're going through some examples. Where before, when it was just you were working on one problem to solve, you want to double down on that with your sponsor in this case, and you want to pick one problem to nail. You want to get really, really, really good at showing that you can solve this problem, right? Because you are on the road now to collecting evidence and data that you can use to justify additional funding and to tell a more effective story with your sponsors, right? So when it's just you and you're out on your own, you can rely to a degree on storytelling. When you are moving to the point that you now have a sponsor and you're trying to sort of negotiate for deeper investment, stories are not going to be enough by themselves. You're going to need evidence, and you're going to need data to back up your stories. Now, if you've matured to the point that you have a small team built up around you, first of all, I would say you're in the minority from what I can see so far, not just of academic OSPOs, but of OSPOs in general in the commercial space. Most open source programs offices only have a couple of people. It's only really larger organizations that might have 2 or 3, or if you're very lucky, you might have 7 or 8 in a large commercial team. And a few of the very large tech companies might have a couple of dozen. So if you get to the point that you have more than just you and a sponsor in an academic OSPO, you've already succeeded wildly. Now you just have to figure out how to stay there. So my recommendation is to prioritize sustainability, and sustainability in this case is sort of shorthand for funding, right? You have to work on identifying things that the university is willing to continue to fund, and that folks outside the university, the foundations, are also willing to fund. So at this point, it becomes much more important to know and align tightly to your university's goals. Is there something that shows up at the board level, or that shows up in sort of the charter documents on the front page of the university that everyone there agrees and understands is important, that you can help to push forward with your team and make sure that your work aligns well and rolls up to that. Investing in sustainability means thinking about and understanding what are the things that the program now needs to show to the university that is going to justify ongoing investment, right? And when we talk about the examples at the end, we'll talk about one that it's difficult to draw a line through that example into sustainability. But when you've gotten to the point that you're here, long-term sustainability is going to be your ongoing concern. Aligning all of your work to a top-level goal and being able to show meaningful progress and demonstrate with the evidence and the data that you have collected that you can move the needle on that goal is much more important at this level. And when you are looking at sustainability in those funding sources, making sure that you have a diverse set of funding streams that are feeding in to support your program, so that you're not overly reliant on a single funder, on a single sponsor, on a single organization. So I mentioned some scenarios that I wanted to walk through, and these are three I pulled not entirely out of the air. In the first scenario, we've got a project with potential, right? There's some professors or some part of the university that has created a project that you can tell from where you're sitting has potential to do well as a community-supported open source project or an open core commercial offering. You'd like to see it be successful, and your desire for success there could come either from a desire to move the tech translation needle for the university, or you could just really like the folks and you want to see them do well out in the public space. So if we think about what you can do if it's just you in a project with potential in your spare time, that's a very, very different from thinking about what you can do with a team or what you can do with you and your sponsor. My recommendation with a project with potential, I'll come back to that. Coming back to the map here, you've got all kinds of things, like places that you can go. Strategy is adding a directional arrow that aligns to these characteristics, the maturity model, right? So strategy tells you the direction that you're going to go. Each incremental step on this arrow aligns to one of these levels of maturity. So sorry, I'm bungling this a little bit, but if we come back to the scenario of project with potential, if you are looking at the project and you are by yourself, the next best step you might be able to take is just to take this project from its initial level of maturity. There are some processes behind how the software is generated, or processes behind how the community is run, but they're not very predictable. They're run very ad hoc. And pick one of those processes and move it to the managed level, right? So this might look like making sure that they're having regular community meetings to engage with their community, right? Or it might look like making sure that their build processes for the software are predictable and reproducible and not just reliant on whatever someone happens to decide they want to do a release, right? If you look at the project and try to swing for the fences right away, and you want to try to get it all the way to the point that it's sort of a big hit project, you're going to try to skip a bunch of levels in maturity growth of the project, and you're going to set yourself up for struggle and failure, right? I want to pause there for a second and check in with folks, because I realize now I've gotten my slides out of order on a couple of these. And if you're on mute, feel free to come off mic and just, is this making sense to folks, the idea of applying maturity models to the direction on your strategy? You can also ask in chat. I see some folks typing. Okay, you're following it better than I feel like it is. Sorry, I did get thrown by my slides being tossed out of order, but that's Duane's fault, to be clear. Let's come back to the second example. You're looking across your university. You see that the community is very ad hoc. You might have pockets of open source enthusiasm in different parts of the student bodies. You might have a lot of folks in maybe a data oriented community that are passionate about open source. But there are all sort of here and there organic growth. You could look at it like wild fruit that's growing up, right? It's not a farm, but there's a lot of ample things here that you could go off. It just needs a little bit of support. If you try to take that community and you look out in the broader ecosystem and you say, well, let's look at what the Cloud Native Computing Foundation does for their community. Wow, they have events, and they have a Discord server and a Slack server, and they do t-shirts, and they do stickers, and they get people together 4 times a year, and they have dinners and everything else. And if you try to do all of that at once, and you try to get to the point that you've got that level of maturity in the community, you end up trying to skip too many steps in your maturity curve for growing community on the campus. And again, you'll set yourself up and your sponsors and your backers for maybe a negative experience as you are promising more than you're able to deliver in that case. I would recommend instead looking for the next logical step that you can take in building out the community. And that might look, like I mentioned earlier, about making sure that people are coming together on a regular basis, right? Or they have one place that they can come and collaborate with each other online, if you discussion forums and so on. It also, though, when you're thinking about this problem, the ad hoc community growth, you have to remember that whether it's just you, whether it's you and your sponsor, or whether it's you and a team, you still have a finite amount of time and money and energy that you can spend on things. So defining the strategy for your OSPO is as much about being clear with yourselves about the things you're not going to do versus the things that you are. You might look at all 3 of these scenarios, and we'll come to the third one here in a moment. You've got projects that you could serve, you've got a community that you could serve, or you've got sort of a teaching goal that you could serve. And they might all look like great opportunities for your OSPO. You may only be able to pick one. And understanding where picking one of those things and doubling down, picking one problem to solve well, getting really good at making sure projects are flowing out and have good stories to tell. You can support that decision by being explicit and writing down as part of your strategy, we are not going to serve these customers, or we are not going to take on these problems today. That doesn't mean you never will. It just means taking them on will require some amount of investment that you have to negotiate with your administration. Let's talk about this third example. You might, if you're just a person, or maybe you and your sponsor, you're looking at the computer science students that are coming out of the university, and you aren't sure that they're getting a chance to practice the open source skills that you think are going to support open science, open data, long-term career development. You want to see more work done there, and you want to see better outcomes for your students. Okay, well, do you have the sponsorship from your sponsor and from the people who are funding your program office to drive that change? If that's what's important to them? What's the next step in that maturity that you can help your students reach, right? Are they currently, there's no predictable process for how students are getting exposed to open source concepts. Like the next step would be to make sure that you have a predictable process, something in the curriculum, some project written into their ongoing education that exposes them all at the same time, or exposes them all on a understood and well traveled path, so that you can start to build that muscle, not just for them, but for the university and for the organization as well. Or it could be that they're getting exposed to these concepts, and there already are these points in the curriculum where they have an open source project that they have to work on or make contributions to, or release, or some sort of other project that they do collectively. What's the next step that you can do beyond that? Maybe it is measuring the impact of those projects once they reach the outside world, right? I would say most people, most engineers who go through the process of releasing their first open source project think the world is going to just magically show up, and if you build it, they will come and they'll start contributing to your project. And your university or your educators might be thinking that way as well. By turning your focus onto, can we show the impact, are these projects being used externally, you can get people thinking about how to release open source that is meaningful and impactful and powerful to the rest of the world. And those are skills that will pay dividends down the line as they're working in open science, open data, and as they're building out the rest of their software engineering career. So that's how I think about building and informing strategy, not just for myself, but as I'm talking to other people. Understanding sort of what problem you're going to go after, and breaking the strategy for that problem down into incremental steps that will help you grow maturity in that capability, or in that practice, or in that project. This approach can apply to a wide range of things, just sort of a way of breaking the problem down. So it doesn't matter if what you have is an entire program that you're looking at, or if you're looking at an individual software project, or if you're looking at an individual skill. You can apply this sort of maturity levels and the capability maturity model to how you want to go after developing in that area. So I'll stop here, and I wanted to throw out a question for the group. And again, feel free to come off mic if you want to ask questions, but I'll also read through the chat and highlight them as well. When you think about the open source opportunities in your own university context, what is an area where you would like to see the university get better, but you're not sure where to start? And now for the people on YouTube, we hit the point where it's uncomfortable silence while we wait for the chats to come in, unless somebody wants to come off. Stephanie, I see your hand. Hey, good to see you. While we're waiting for Stephanie to type their question. Oh, okay. Patrick, I see your hand.
Thanks, Duane. So I was curious, I'm not answering your question, but I've written some questions of my own, but I'm curious how often, from especially your experience at Capital One, Indeed, PayPal, where you've been working with open source, how often and how are you communicating upward to raise awareness and reinforce the value proposition and highlight the success and identify the opportunities? Like, what are you doing to engage what would be on campus, the provost or the CTO or CIO or the campus president and the C-suite? Can you talk a little bit about, maybe not
absolutely
specific examples, but help us there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer to your question is about 10% as often as I should be. And it doesn't matter how much I feel like I'm communicating about it, I still always seem to find out that I'm not saying it enough and often enough. So I think it's good practice to build in regular checkpoints where you're reporting up. And I try to do that on a monthly basis with sort of the people immediately above me who manage a lot of other responsibilities. And I'm very opportunistic at looking for chances to get in front of other crowds or other folks where I can reinforce the messaging. But I consistently feel like I'm relearning the same lesson over and over again, which is I need to have a few crystal clear bullet points that I can drop to anyone and everyone who will listen, and I need to drop them as often as possible until I'm sick of saying it, and I need to say it like 5 more times. The reality is that no matter what your organization, you get a couple people above you and they're trying to manage 60 things, right? And so it really is about making sure that you are repeating the same message often enough that it sticks for them. I don't know that there's a good one size fits all. I've never heard anybody say this is the cadence that we do and it absolutely solves all of our problems. But I have heard consistently, not just from myself, but from other peers in the industry, you have to say things probably 10 more times than you want to, and then another 5 more times.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. I'm for fear of hogging the mic, but in hopes of inspiring others to perhaps join in. You mentioned building a coalition at the beginning. What do you think about in terms of folks on campus, in this case, who might be actually threatened by an open source initiative on campus? So I'm thinking of the procurement and contracts managers who have long-standing statewide contracts with proprietary tools, or instructional designers who have developed teaching and learning models and techniques based on specific tools already implemented. IT departments that fear architectural infrastructure change, just any change, really. Help desk, I could go on and on. Is that a consideration?
It is. It's a great question. I think about these folks a couple different ways. One, when I find myself in that situation or a similar situation, I tend to make sure that I have regular check-ins with them for no reason, right? Just making sure that we are building and maintaining a bridge and an understanding that there's a person at the other end of this process, and kind of hear what's going on in their world. And I've never found myself regretting investing that kind of relationship building. Because while they might have fear today, or they might have, valid reasons for going down the path they have, and invested a lot of time and energy and blood and sweat and tears and long nights and so on and so forth, and sort of building out the things that they have, and are naturally hesitant to, when they see something that comes along and kind of threatens it. Like, that might be them today. Tomorrow, they may have a problem that you can help them solve as an ally, right? That has nothing to do with sort of the core thing that they have built. And so I think for many of those folks, when you have that relationship, and I've experienced when you have that relationship, you might not be able to help them solve their big problem, but it's inevitable that they will have a little problem that you're able to help with. So that's sort of perspective one. My second perspective is that it doesn't matter how good an idea is, somewhere someone in the organization is going to think it's bad, and they're going to resist you. You may find yourself needing to do a lot of work to convert them, but in most cases, I would much rather invest my energy building the coalition of the people who want to see this change, and sort of routing around that, and treat it like a rock in the stream, right? Like, it might be in the way. All the rest of the water is still going downhill, so you make sure that you're picking up the folks who already want to go downhill, and eventually, like, either the rock gets worn down or the rock gets left behind, right? And so when I was leading inner source work at PayPal, there toward the end of my tenure, There were definitely people who I talked to who thought it was a bad idea, who didn't want to have anything to do with it. And again, if you're just one person, even if you have a team, you have a finite amount of time and resources. You can spend all of your time really trying to change someone's mind. You can find the people who want to go in the right direction anyhow. Eventually, when you demonstrate that you've got success, when you're collecting data, when you're collecting evidence, when you're telling a compelling story, eventually they have to come along for the ride because everyone else is going. So, Stephanie, do you want to try your mic again? And then Trish, I see your question as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yay!
Can you hear me? Yay! Hi, Duane. My question was, and I get well. Good. I'm sorry. I'm not. I did no screen on today. It's too early in the morning here in California. But I had a question, and I'm sorry I had to actually go off the call and come back to get my mic to work. So if you answered part of this and I missed it, then I apologize for the repeat. But um, one of the things that we're working with the UC, the University of California network of OSPOs, and Virginia, who's also on the call, did a great survey that popped up. The big question that the biggest question everyone has is, how do we get funding to work on like continue projects and maintain projects that are coming out of our universities? And I think that you were highlighting kind of some of the main things that we're finding from our customers and clients, like the people that we're servicing are. And I think that that's the big question. I just wanted your input, what your thoughts are on some of like ways that have worked, because I know you did some work previously on looking at how foundations, like how industry works with open source and through foundations and the like. And if you were seeing anything like that with regards to how they support academic or, even just research or other types, maybe not the kind of standard through foundation support, like through Linux Foundation or other did any of the open source foundations?
Yeah. Just super easy question. How do we get money, right? And I'm not being flip, but it's also a weird question right now, as so much has been upended. There's been so much change in the last year or so, and how funding is flowing into projects and through our institutions and so on. I think one mistake that projects make is not thinking about the path to sustainability earlier. And getting to the point that we've proven a piece of technology works, or we think something is interesting. Now all we have to do is figure out like who will pay for it. When instead, if you're thinking earlier about, are we solving a problem that someone will pay to have solved, it changes your perspective on how you're thinking about funding, because it's a much earlier part of the process. Now, when you get to the point that you've got a project that's been proven to be useful, I think that question is still sort of the crux to it. Who is going to pay to have this problem solved for them? And what should our project look like in order for them to be able to pay us for that, right? In cases where it's something that has the potential to have a commercial offering, there's a somewhat well-traveled path there for starting up businesses or opening core companies and so on and so forth. It's the somewhat fuzzier stuff that I like. If I'm candid, I don't know how to answer that question right now. A year ago, I would have been talking about NSF grants and so on, and now I think everyone is trying to figure out sort of what that looks like next. So, yeah, I think my best advice is start thinking about how the project will sustain itself yesterday, and if you didn't start yesterday, start today. With the question in mind, like who's going to pay to have this problem solved, and how much are they going to pay? And that comes back again. It's a sort of a different version of knowing and understanding your customers, right? When I said that earlier for the open source program office, it was really about understanding the people on campus that you're going to serve. But that same process, developing customer personas, doing user research, can be applied for projects and understanding who their users are as well. So tough question, Stephanie, but that's my thoughts. I see a couple things. Trish, I'm reading through your question right now. I'm wondering if you want to come off mic if you're still there. Nope, I'll read it out. So one thing I found useful at my college was to plan for structural maturity right from the start. In my consulting experience, I found that level 3 and forward tend to arrive as a surprise, and teams might not be prepared to make their ad hoc processes, even ideas, part of the longer term strategic and operational structures of the organization. Love that. So plan for maturity now from the outset. Your points about building coalitions and preempting points of resistance are key to building that process. There's a really interesting point in what Trish has said here, as we're talking about this transition point for projects where it's been running ad hoc, it's been a passion project for people, and that part was fun. And now we need to formalize it and start putting measures and controls in place, and getting maybe more disciplined about the project. And it may be that the people involved in the project, to get through the first couple of levels of maturity, just don't enjoy the last couple levels of maturity, and that you have to engage with different groups of people or different campus services in order to help get the project there. And that can sometimes create friction in projects. So it's an interesting observation that Trish had. Trish, thank you for sharing that. Virginia, I wonder if you want to come off mic to discuss your question. If not, I'll go ahead and read it out.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I feel like at some point in the talk you like started to say something about like a good first problem and then like kind of stopped, and I was like, no, keep going.
No problem.
But and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a specific like you should do this, but just like what are the characteristics of like a good first project. Particularly I'm coming from a team with like a lot of diverse people with a lot of diverse areas of expertise, and it's very tempting to say like, okay, you work on this, you work on that, you work on that, and then we have like a lot of projects that are just a little bit done.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll do my best here, and I say that as a person who literally has a bunch of projects that are a little bit done himself, right? So this is a discipline that I also am working daily on in my own life. I would start with a different question, which is, what is the why of your budding OSPO, right? Is it that you've recognized, sort of a broad opportunity and everyone thinks it's a good idea, but you haven't coalesced around a why, or do you have a specific, like, this is what we want the core tenant or the core principle or the core motivator for our OSPO to be? And that might be a group conversation, or it might be a declaration where you plant a flag, right? And so I'll give an example. Yeah, actually, we can pull from those 3 examples that I was showing earlier, if I can get back to them, right? If the why of your OSPO is we're releasing projects out into the wild with no support and they're failing, like, great, now you know the problem that you want to go after, and that's gonna change what your good first problem will look like. If the why of your OSPO is our community's all over the place, we're not united, we're not pulling in the same direction, everybody's duplicating work from each other, there's no shared resources between us, we are going to rally the community, and that is what our OSPO is going to be about. Great, like, now you have a why, and that's going to inform what your good first problem are. If you're looking across sort of the output of a university, and you're saying, well, our students are going out and they're just not prepared for the realities of working in an open and collaborative way, and that is the problem we're going to solve, your first problem will change from that point, right? So finding the why of your OSPO will help you identify what your good first problem is. The second thing I would say is if you're going to go after a good first problem, it should be one that when you think about sponsors and the advocates and the other people in your context that need to support the idea of investing in this, it should be something they all understand without having to get a whole lot of context on it, right? Pick a problem space that is well known to everyone enough that you don't have to explain what the problem is and help them understand why it was a problem before you could explain the solution and how you were able to help, right? And so when I have seen that used successfully, to step out of the academic context, when I've seen that used successfully in the corporate context, typically it's been we're gonna take on there's one team or there's 2 or 3 teams working on one product internally, and nobody can get any work done because of them. So we're going to go fix that, right? And they might be a team that has a whole bunch of dependencies, and they're constantly blocking other folks from being able to release because there's just too much going on. That was very much so the reality of what we had at PayPal in some cases. And so by latching onto a problem that's pretty well understood by everybody, you sort of save all of this work that you have to do to contextualize on why it was a problem in the first place, and you can focus on talking about your impact and your results. So those are my 2 pieces of advice. Know for sure what the why is, and like that doesn't have to be an etched in stone written for everything, right? You can pick a why of your OSPO and test it on working on a problem, and if it doesn't work, you can pick a different why and work in that direction. This process tends to be iterative as people change and appetites for sort of different forms of impact change, and you might have to shift your footing a lot over time until you find one that feels really solid in your own context. Helpful, Virginia?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
I see about 5 minutes left in the planned session. Anyone else have anything they want to throw, whether it was related to anything that we've discussed or completely random? I see some typing in the chat. Ria asks, any suggestions on measuring impact? You're welcome to come off mic and say a little more. You're also welcome to type, and I'll wait.
Metrics are a really key area for measuring success, measuring achievement of goals. I'm just curious, what type of metrics do you look at or recommend looking at? And I'll also context, I'm not in an academic OSPO, I'm in a commercial OSPO, but I wanted to engage in this just to kind of see if there's any cross lessons to learn or cross ideas, and the idea of how do you measure true impact, and underlying that is my general deep suspicion of many metrics, which sometimes look like impressive numbers but don't really tell a story.
Yep. I would back up your impression there that there are many metrics that tell that look impressive but don't tell a story. I think the GitHub vanity metrics are a great example here. Like we know stars and forks don't tell us anything, right? They are a vague sense of popularity but don't mean anything. The easiest metrics tend to be the ones that are of least value, right? And that's true of stars and forks for projects, right? But the problem I see widely is that we use the easy metrics because we have them, and then everything gets based off of these easy metrics, and that becomes the story. And so we find ourselves at the point where we're investing in using easy metrics, and we maybe get a year or 2 into something when we have a real meaningful conversation about impact and recognize that we aren't getting what we thought we were out of it. When I think about what I want to use for metrics, and I talked at the top of the talk about how I think a lot about open source sustainability. I want to know Are projects getting better because of what we do? If we incentivize contributions, if we give money to projects, if we put these processes and policies in place, are the projects actually getting better? And the only way to determine that is to sort of measure project health over time. And I think we're starting to get some solutions on the market that do that for us, some open source solutions. There's one in particular from Red Hat that's name has just jumped out of my memory. And so we're starting to see some of that, but getting the useful data is hard, and we fall into the trap constantly of using the easy data, and it's just not that useful. 8Knot, yes, thank you, Ria. 8Knot is a great offering that's hosted by Red Hat that shows sort of project health over time. Now, it's a very project health focused thing, and that's I pay attention to that because that's what I care about. So my closing thought there is if you're going to go after impact metrics, make sure they are metrics that your sponsors and your advocates and your leaders care about. It doesn't matter if you care about them, they have to care about them. And recognize that if the data is really easy to get to, it probably is telling you the wrong story and you should look deeper.
Thanks.
With that, you're welcome. Folks, I hope this was useful for everyone. I enjoyed the discussion here at the end. I'll toss over to Patrick, I guess, for close, or Michelle for close.
I can close it out. This is Wilma. So thank you very much, Duane, for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts and experience with regard to these different startup scenarios. It was very informative, and as you said, the conversation and sort of interaction at the end was particularly useful, I think. So thank you once again for joining us, and thank all of you for attending. This session will be on our YouTube channel in a week or so. I'm not sure how quickly they'll be translated to the YouTube channel, but if you wanted to forward it to your friends or other folks who couldn't be here today, please feel free to do so once that recording link is available. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.